When a child is missing, the Florida State Attorney's Office is involved with the investigation from the start. In Tampa, Florida, in late summer of 1998, a grieving family and a community on edge would depend on State Attorneys Jay Pruner and Chris Moody to find justice.
Any time that a child is missing, and especially a young child that's 7 years old, it's going to make everybody, the investigators, law enforcement, the news media, the public, everybody very interested in the outcome, because children are our most precious thing that we know of. And anytime one of them is in danger, then that's going to be something that we don't want to see a bad outcome. Everybody wants a happy ending.
Good morning, 611 here on Your Spot for Country. We're going to get started with a new tune today called Driving.
On September 11th, 1998, sometime after sunrise, a 39-year-old single mother awoke, alone in her bed. Catherine Hartman's 7-year-old daughter, Amanda, often slept with her.
Amanda.
But the girl was not there.
Amanda. Amanda, what are you doing up so early? Amanda.
Catherine became
Amanda?
increasingly alarmed when her daughter didn't answer her.
Amanda!
It soon became clear this was no ordinary morning.
Amanda!
It was the dawn of the worst day imaginable in Catherine Hartman's life.
Amanda!
Terrified, the mother called authorities. At 6:30 a.m., a 911 call was received by the Hillsborough County Emergency Dispatch. Detectives and uniformed officers quickly responded to the last place Catherine saw her daughter, her own home. Detective Albert Brackett was the lead investigator on the case.
We responded as we do in any missing juvenile case. Any child under the age of 12, there's an extensive search that's conducted initially.
It was 2:30 in the morning when Catherine drifted off to sleep. Now, some 5 hours later, Amanda was missing. And teams of detectives, deputies, and K-9 units were dispatched to search the neighborhood and wooded areas around her home.
So we're looking for a child that could possibly be out there in her pajamas. We're hoping that maybe she was in the area, maybe at a friend's house. When none of those panned out, we expanded the search and we went door to door. And then when it appeared as though she wasn't in the immediate vicinity, of course, we checked her school bus companies.
Authorities also contacted the Florida State Attorney's Office in Tampa. Prosecutor Jay Pruner took the call.
Our state attorney's office became involved in the Amanda Brown case within hours of her disappearance. In the initial stage of the investigation, you don't want to foreclose any avenues of what may have happened to Amanda Brown.
Police needed to question both of the missing child's parents. Authorities were sent to locate Roy Brown, Amanda's father. Brown and Catherine Hartman had divorced 3 years earlier.
No, not Amanda.
There had been a custody hearing to determine parental rights. The court ruled that both parents would share custody of Amanda.
Well, at that point, we're in the early stages of the investigation. It's important to look at those avenues so we don't overlook any potential evidence. So Roy Brown was looked at, as was Catherine Hartman.
Roy Brown appeared shaken when he found out his daughter was missing. He agreed to answer some questions at the sheriff's office. It was up to Detective Dorothy Martinez to determine whether either of Amanda Brown's parents may have had anything to do with her disappearance. Detective Martinez interviewed Amanda's father at length. On the night in question, he said he'd been home watching TV with his current wife. Brown said that according to the custody agreement, Amanda spent one night a week with him. He told the detectives he and Amanda were both looking forward to a trip they were planning for the following weekend.
I feel very confident that you had no involvement.
He was asked about his ex-wife and admitted she used drugs.
Roy knew about Catherine's drug use. He knew that she was addicted to prescription painkillers, and he was concerned about it, of course, but he was very adamant that Catherine would not knowingly allow harm to come to Amanda.
As the hours ticked by, there was still no sign of Amanda. Catherine gave authorities details about the events of the previous evening. She had last seen her daughter when the two fell asleep together on her bed, Catherine explained. Ms. Hartman told authorities she had a new boyfriend. His name was Willie Crane. She said Crane worked as a crab fisherman and that they met at a neighborhood bar. Catherine called him before police arrived that morning, but he said he didn't know where Amanda could be. Catherine had prepared a spaghetti dinner for Willie Crane the night before.
Not done yet, so, my daughter Amanda's here. I want you to meet her. Come in. Sweetheart, this is Willie.
Hi, little lady. You must be Amanda. You call
Little
me.
Amanda took an immediate liking to Willie, Catherine recalled.
So you gotta finish that.
She told police he helped Amanda with her homework, and they played tic-tac-toe. Willie and Amanda traced each other's hands on
Ever
paper,
made a turkey out of it?
and Catherine later noticed that on one of the drawings, the words "Amanda likes Willie" were written.
Back by the
Catherine said Willie invited her and Amanda to go back to his house and watch a movie.
Have a seat, find a movie.
Amanda was excited about the idea, so Catherine agreed to go.
Thanks.
Hello. Oh, hey, Judy, how are you? Yeah.
When Willie's daughter called, he told Catherine to say hello.
You talk to my daughter for a second while I finish it?
Catherine barely knew her, so she was surprised when Willie handed her the phone.
Do you live around here? Oh, really?
You like those videos? You wanna go watch some?
Okay.
While Mom's on the phone?
Okay.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys. Well, I know. It's funny. I don't get a chance much to do that.
Catherine was unsure how long she was on the phone.
I actually know where he is, so I'm gonna have him call you. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Bye. After I.
20 minutes may have elapsed, she said, when she realized that Amanda and Willie were no longer in the living room. Catherine walked down the hallway and heard Amanda's voice behind a closed door.
Hey, what are you guys doing?
Willie told Catherine he'd been teaching Amanda how to use the remote.
Come on, Susan. Come on now.
Here, sit down.
She felt slightly uncomfortable and suggested that it was time to
I'm
go.
sorry, I'm tired and I've got a really bad back.
It was past Amanda's bedtime, and Catherine's back was hurting her.
Here,
What is this?
Valium. They'll help your back. You'll relax.
Willie offered her some of his Valium.
That'll be fine. No, they're not very strong. Here.
Catherine told authorities Willie followed her and Amanda back to their residence. Despite feeling the effects of the sedatives, Catherine noticed Willie was a bit intoxicated. She suggested it might be wise for him to rest there for a while and sober up before heading home.
So anyway, I told him, look, you either give me more money. I'm not going to start working double shifts for nothing, you know. And this guy, don't think, hey, baby, what are you doing? You got to go to bed. Now.
Don't put her to
Sorry.
bed with her hair wet.
Oh,
Get a cold.
They don't catch cold. We do it all the time, don't we? I do too.
And I never put my kids to bed with their hair wet.
I'll tell you what, if you can get her to stay still long enough to blow dry her hair, go ahead and do it. But we got to go to bed. It's getting late. Don't we, baby? Come on.
Amanda, you want to dry your hair? Have you got a hair dryer?
Yes.
You want to get it?
Okay.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
In an effort to follow up on all possible leads, investigators called for a background check on Willie Crane.
We got some background information on him and discovered that he had an extensive criminal history that included arrests and convictions for sexual battery on minor children. So we were naturally very concerned at that point.
Detectives immediately got word about Willie Crane's past to prosecutor Jay Pruner. They told him Crane had been sentenced to 20 years in the 1980s for 5 counts of sexual battery on a minor. He was released after serving only 6 years.
Amanda, come on, I mean it. We've got to go to bed. It's too late, sweetie.
Catherine told police it was after 2 a.m. when she and Amanda went to bed that night. The late hour and the Valium Willie gave her had completely exhausted her, and she fell into a deep sleep.
It wasn't apparent one way or the other at the outset whether this was a kidnapping or a runaway, because we didn't have enough background information right away to make that determination. What was evident at the beginning was that the last male near Amanda Brown was a convicted pedophile.
Amanda?
A distraught mother reported her 7-year-old daughter missing from her house in Tampa, Florida, in late summer 1998.
Amanda!
Authorities and volunteers launched a massive search for the girl. Police had a suspect in the case.
Ever made a turkey out of a
Willie Crane was the last man to see Amanda. Still, Florida State Attorney Jay Pruner was determined to explore all possible leads.
You have to be wary of jumping to conclusions. It would have been easy to focus on Willie Crane to the exclusion of any other possibility in this case. But we realized early on if we had done that, that would have caused problems in the prosecution at trial. We had to find out more about Amanda Brown. Was she a problem? Was she a good kid? We had to find out if there were any other possibilities anyone else could have taken her, and that perhaps Willie Crane may have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. So without excluding anyone as a suspect or identifying anybody as a suspect at that time, they look at Catherine Hartman to determine whether or not she had any involvement.
In order to rule her out as a suspect, authorities requested that Catherine Hartman submit to a polygraph test.
Did you withhold any information regarding your daughter's disappearance?
The polygraph examiner told Detective Martinez that Catherine was telling the truth.
Catherine was extremely upset, but believed that she genuinely loved her child, but she had a lot of things going on in her life that caused her to use some very poor judgment.
6 hours after her mother reported her missing, there were still no signs of Amanda Brown. Her father, Roy Brown, was also ruled out as a suspect. He became involved with the search effort and was instrumental in building public support. As search efforts continued, so did the search for the last man to see the 7-year-old girl. Lead investigator Al Brackett sent a deputy to Willie Crane's residence. But no one was home. According to a neighbor, Willie had left early that morning.
And that neighbor actually indicated that that was unusual for Crane to leave that early in the morning, that normally he stayed up at night and partied late, and that he'd usually get up in the late morning and go crab fishing in the early afternoon.
The witness also suggested that Crane may have left in a hurry.
He knocked over a post right outside of his residence by the driveway.
Locating Crane would not be easy. According to Catherine Hartman, he had said he was going crab fishing. But where? Tampa Bay alone extends nearly 300 square miles. Detective Michael Hurley began his search at the crab shack where Willie Crane worked.
When we got to the crab hut, we couldn't locate Mr. Crane, or his truck, or his trailer, or his boat. We did come in contact with some folks that knew Mr. Crane and believe they knew where he went crabbing.
The crabbers agreed to help detectives find Willie, escorting them to the boat ramp that Willie regularly used.
When we got there, the person that took us there pointed out a white Ford truck with an empty trailer on it and told us that was Willie Crane's truck and trailer. Mr. Crane was nowhere around. The person that took us there had his crab boat with him and volunteered to take us and see if we could locate Mr. Crane in case he had taken a girl with him crabbing.
Storm clouds loomed on the horizon.
After about 20 to 30 minutes, we located Mr. Crane's crab buoys in the water.
Investigators found fresh bait in his crab traps. They were getting closer to locating Willie Crane.
We went up to an area of Tampa Bay known as Double Branch. And on Double Branch, we saw a boat, crab boat, with one guy in it. And the guy took us up there, told us, that's Willie. When we pulled up next to his boat, I introduced myself, explained we were out there looking for a missing girl, and thought he might know something about her and be able to help us. He said that she wasn't with him, and I explained to him I'd like him to come in and talk to us, and he volunteered to come in with us and talk to us. I asked him, hey, can I ride on your boat? He said, sure.
On the ride back, the detective was intrigued when he saw the suspect's shoes. Willie was wearing loafers, an odd choice, it seemed, for fishing. Hurley also noted scratches on the man's arms. Willie Crane agreed to come to the sheriff's office for questioning. Authorities and local volunteers expanded the search to include the water areas surrounding Tampa Bay. There was still hope that 7-year-old Amanda Brown would be found alive. At the sheriff's office, Willie continued to cooperate. He answered questions for several hours about the evening he spent with Catherine Hartman and her daughter. His version of events was different from Catherine's. According to Crane, Amanda had gone to sleep in her own bed that night. He said he decided to lay down with Ms. Hartman, but it was with her alone. Crane said that when Amanda slipped under the covers sometime later, he left because he had to get up early for work.
At that point, Crane says some things to me that don't make any sense. I'm sitting there and he tells me after he left Catherine Hartman's trailer, he went home. He says it was about 1:30 in the morning, which is a little bit different time version than what Catherine says, but he said when he gets home, he spilled some bleach, and he didn't like the smell of bleach, so he cleaned it up and then decided, well, I'm going to clean the trailer. So, you know, I'm a little concerned. Why would he be telling me about, you know, spilling bleach? It didn't make any sense to me at that point in time.
Brackett also noticed the scratches on Willie's arms.
I just asked him outright. I looked and I said, how'd you get those scratches on your arms? And Crane had no response. He's just sitting there looking at me. And I said, well, I asked you a question. How did you get the scratches on your arms? And he said, you're trying to pin this on me. You're trying to make things up. I said, no, I'm asking you for an answer to a direct question.
How did you get those scratches on your arm?
Y'all trying to blame everything on me.
He said, I'm not doing this. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
He did hand over his clothes to police for analysis. Brackett noticed there were stains on the front of his boxers, stains that looked like blood. Brackett gave Crane a change of clothes.
At that point, I really felt uneasy about letting Crane go. I felt that he had potentially done something to Amanda Brown, but there wasn't anything I could do because I had nothing to hold him on. We checked to see if he had any warrants. He didn't. And at that point, I actually had to drive Crane to the crab business and let him walk free.
Authorities needed hard evidence to hold Crane. They hoped a search of his home would provide that evidence. Authorities in Tampa, Florida, had a suspect in connection with the 1998 disappearance of 7-year-old Amanda Brown.
I don't like this. I'm not talking to you.
Willie Crane was questioned and released.
Okay.
Investigators worked with prosecutor Chris Moody to secure a search warrant for Crane's property. They hoped that evidence in Willie Crane's home would link him to the missing girl.
We work with the police daily on a case like this. They update us. They do all the work, the legwork. We aren't out there beating the streets. But as they come across a piece of evidence or an interview or some other information, they start to piece together and they understand what the requirements are in terms of building a case.
10 hours after Catherine Hartman reported her 7-year-old daughter missing, police executed a search warrant on the nearby home of Willie Crane, a recent boyfriend of Catherine's. Detective Al Brackett led the search.
The first thing I smelled was a very strong odor of bleach coming from the bathroom.
It was obvious the area had been scrubbed clean.
And I pick up the cover to the toilet seat. I see what appears to be blood. So at that point, I have the evidence technician seize the whole toilet seat. We took it off, dismantled it. In addition to that, there was a piece of tissue that looked like somebody had thrown it in the toilet and then tried to flush the toilet, but it stuck on the inside wall of the toilet bowl, and that had what appeared to be blood on it also.
Brackett reported to prosecutor Chris Moody it seems strange that Crane had obviously cleaned the entire bathroom, but he didn't touch the sink.
The areas that were clean were the tub, the shower stall, the floor, and the toilet. But the sink had hairs in it and was basically pretty grimy looking. It looked like it had not been cleaned in some time. That raised everybody's suspicions as to why someone would clean so thoroughly one area but not the other area of the bathroom.
Prosecutors believed there was a strong possibility the bathroom was a crime scene. The evidence collected at Crane's house was immediately sent for analysis.
At that time, we were still working on two fronts, trying to find Amanda if she was alive, and observing evidence if she wasn't. So we focused right away on the blood and tried to work that up as fast as possible.
Later that day, Crane Crane provided saliva and blood samples in accordance with a court order. As the case against Willie Crane grew stronger, detectives were anxious to arrest him. The prosecution team remained cautious.
Until the DNA actually came back, we didn't feel like we had the sort of proof that we needed to be able to prosecute him.
Authorities kept Crane under surveillance, as did the media. At every turn, a camera was there. Police interviewed local fishermen who worked in the same areas as Willie Crane, including Al Darlington.
You saw something on television? Yes, I did.
Darlington had seen Willie Crane the morning of the disappearance.
Me and a friend of mine were sitting here waiting on the daylight so we could start working.
Right.
And we saw Willie Crane pull in, and he backed all the way in the water past us until the middle of his tires were in the water. I mean, you just don't do those things. I mean, the salt water just rusts your brakes out and rusts the whole underside of your truck, and it was really, I couldn't believe it, that somebody that does this every day would do something like that.
In the days following Amanda Brown's disappearance, scores of law enforcement personnel searched hundreds of square miles, concentrating on the areas where Willie Crane lived and fished. Amanda's parents, as well as the community, still held out hope that the girl would be found alive.
And there was an exhaustive law enforcement effort on land, in the air, and on the sea, using a number of different types of technologies. Thermal imaging, sonar, airboats were used to get into some of the shallower waters of Upper Tampa Bay. A storm came up very quickly, and as one of the airboat operators tried to race back to shore, the storm hit and capsized the airboat.
The crew was rescued. The vessel lost. There was still no sign of the missing girl. The media attention on Willie Crane continued. He was constantly on the television news and in newspapers. As a result, 2 women came forward, alleging Crane had molested them when they were children.
They were now grown women. A detective went down and interviewed them and determined that there was enough probable cause in their story to file charges against Willie Crane. And that is what we did. We filed charges on 2 older cases from, I believe it's 25 or 26 years ago, with 2 victims who had lived near him at that time, and he had molested them.
In Florida, rape of a child under 12 has no statute of limitations. Crane was arrested and charged with the decades-old crimes. Their prime suspect was now in custody. The prosecution had waited 3 weeks to receive test results that they hoped would link Willie Crane to the disappearance of Amanda Brown.
Well, we looked at other people in other areas, anybody else who had access during the time. All of those leads rather quickly came to dead ends, and the only unanswered questions we had remained with Willie Crane. And those questions got answered when the lab called and gave us the report that they had found Amanda's DNA pattern on his underwear and on his toilet seat.
Dr. Martin Tracy, a population geneticist, would examine the test results. He examined the statistical odds of finding Amanda's DNA in the same area as Willie Crane's.
If you expect to find his DNA in the house, you don't expect to find her DNA in the house. The odds, to me, are very convincing. It means that she was there, okay? And the fact that you see mixtures of his DNA sample with the victim's DNA sample suggests that they were there together.
The DNA results gave prosecutors their strongest evidence linking Willie Crane to Amanda Brown's disappearance.
That, coupled with the circumstantial evidence that we had, the way he acted at the boat ramp, the way he was dressed at the boat ramp, convinced us beyond a reasonable doubt that he had abducted and killed Amanda Brown. So we charged him with murder and kidnapping.
Prosecutor Jay Pruner broke the news and its implications to Amanda's father.
One of the hardest, most difficult conversations I've ever had as a prosecutor was to sit down with Roy Brown and to tell Roy Brown, we're going to file murder charges against Willie Crane, and that means that we believe Amanda is dead. And the devastation that was apparent on Roy Brown increased tenfold.
The prosecution was convinced that Amanda had died at the hands of Willie Crane. Now, without physical evidence, they would have to convince 12 people how she died and why her body was missing. 1 year after 7-year-old Amanda Brown disappeared from her home in Tampa, Florida, Willie Crane stood trial for her murder.
This is the trial of the state of Florida versus William Crane.
The girl's body had never been found, and authorities believed Crane, a crab fisherman, had disposed of her body in the murky waters of Tampa Bay. Amanda's mother, Catherine Hartman, was the first witness for the prosecution.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Catherine, what we're going to do now is attempt to recreate...
The morning her daughter went missing, Catherine told authorities that Crane had been at her house for dinner the night before.
I looked out, you know, like out on the porch, but she would never go out in the yard in the dark.
The key elements in this case from a prosecution standpoint was to establish to the jury's satisfaction that Amanda Brown was dead, to not have them point their finger at Catherine Hartman as a terrible mother and therefore acquit Willie Crane because of her irresponsibility.
Had Amanda ever run away overnight?
No.
Did she ever threaten to?
No. She was afraid of the dark.
Have you ever seen Amanda Brown since you fell asleep next to her in the early morning hours of Friday, September 11th, 1998?
No.
The state would try to show that Willie Crane selected his victim carefully, preying on a woman he knew to be vulnerable in order to get at his real target, her daughter.
In this case, he sized up Catherine Hartman with, I anticipate, within minutes of meeting her as a single mother who was in financial need, who had a drug dependency or addiction, and he had the answers to all of that.
We're going to go back, first of all, to Wednesday, September the 9th.
Catherine described meeting Crane at a bar in East Tampa 2 days before Amanda's disappearance.
Willie Crane started conversation with her, started flashing money, wrote down his phone number on a $50 bill and gave it to her. He had the money, he had the drugs.
Catherine admitted that the following night at Crane's house, she lost track of Willie and her daughter while she was on the phone.
How long did you spend on the phone?
About 20, 25 minutes, something like that.
And when you went looking for your daughter and Mr. Crane, was the door to the master bedroom open or shut?
It was shut.
And what did you do?
I opened it.
He knew how to endear himself not only to Catherine Hartman, to Amanda Brown.
Sure.
Within 30 hours, Willie Crane was able to size up the situation, to probe for weaknesses, to put himself in a position where he could take Amanda Brown out of the bed and to get her away from Catherine Hartman, who he knew from giving her 25 milligrams of Valium would be sleeping through the night. So he's a classic predator.
Catherine's testimony was compelling, but it also posed an obstacle. Pruner knew the defense would try to paint her as a reckless, irresponsible mother. If the tactic worked, the jury could blame Catherine, not Willie Crane, for Amanda's fate.
We tried to steal Catherine Hartman's nerves. We tried to ready her for the attack that's going to come in cross-examination.
The defense attorney asked Catherine about other men in her life. He also implied that her home was unsafe, noting the lock on her front door was broken.
Now, your front door didn't lock, is that correct?
That's right.
Isn't it true Mr. Crane could have left around 2:30 and maybe not shut that door completely or properly?
Objection, Judge. Calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Someone else could have come in during that time, isn't that correct? Between 2:30 and 6:15, you were asleep, were you not?
Yes, I was asleep.
To her credit, she was very willing to lay bare her scars and her weaknesses if it helped get justice for Amanda.
The state's next witness, medical examiner Dr. Russell Vega, testified about the scratches on Willie Crane's arms following Amanda's disappearance.
Dr. Vega's testimony was compelling because it explained through the eyes of a medical expert that the scratches on Willie Crane's arm were consistent with the size and pattern of scratch marks that a little 7-year-old girl's hands would leave.
And how long have you been
On cross-examination, the defense would challenge Dr. Vega's testimony.
Let's go to Exhibit 32. Those are photographs of an injury, scratches to the arm, is that correct?
That's correct, a scratch on the back of the arm a little toward the inside.
Could these be consistent with human fingernails?
Yes, they could have been made by human fingernails.
Could they also be consistent with crab traps or mechanisms with wire meshing?
Yes, they could.
How about bushes, branches, twigs, things of that nature?
Well, they could be consistent with those things, too.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions?
The defense repeatedly countered the prosecution witnesses with their own version of what might have happened to Amanda Brown. The prosecution called local fisherman Al Darlington as their next witness. They were counting on him to supply some of the most persuasive testimony. Darlington had seen Crane at the boat ramp the morning of Amanda's disappearance.
Did you arrive at the boat ramp in the early morning hours?
He testified to Crane's odd behavior and attire that morning.
When he got out of his truck, I noticed he had on dress clothes. He had on like loafer-type shoes, either a real dark blue or black, like a double knit type slacks, and like a knit type dress shirt. He was dressed up like he'd just come from a bar, and it being 6:30 in the morning, I was like, well, this is unusual.
Had you ever seen Mr. Crane dressed this way before when he was crab fishing?
Nah, I've never seen anybody dressed like that to go crabbing.
Did you have a conversation with the defendant?
Your Honor, may we approach?
What Darlington had seen was strong testimony. What he'd heard was even stronger.
Judge, these statements were made.
The state wanted the jury to hear that Crane had once told Darlington that if he needed to, he could hide a body where no one would ever find it. The defense knew the statement would have a strong impact on the jury, so they appealed to the judge to exclude it.
Judge, these statements were allegedly made regarding somebody who was messing with his crab traps. It has nothing to do with what he's being accused of here. He's not accused of killing a fellow crabber.
Your Honor, it actually goes to the heart of our case.
The prosecution argued that Crane was boasting about a skill, like being able to fire a weapon, which would be admissible.
There's a situation here where I've got to be able to show we have a missing girl.
The judge seemed unconvinced.
This is out of context, extremely prejudicial, and irrelevant to the charge, Judge.
For prosecutors, getting the jury to hear this testimony was essential to their case. They might not have a body, but they did have a defendant who claimed to know how to hide one. In September 1999, Willie Crane was on trial for the murder and kidnap of 7-year-old Amanda Brown. His defense attorney argued against allowing damaging testimony. He did not want the jury to hear that Crane had bragged about knowing how to hide a body. After hearing arguments from both the prosecution and the defense, Judge Barbara Fleischer was ready to make her decision.
Okay, I don't think it goes to his state of mind at the time. I think it does go to his familiarity with the area and his ability to do this. So I'm going to allow it. I think it's more probative than it is prejudicial.
To Prosecutor Jay Pruner's relief, she ruled in favor of the prosecution.
Mr. Darlington, did you ever have a conversation with the defendant in which he indicated the ability to get rid of or conceal a body?
Well, he didn't tell me how to, but he said he could if he wanted to.
On how many occasions did he say that?
2.
2. And what did he say?
He said if he wanted to get rid of a body, he could hide it where no one would find it.
Darlington's testimony proved crucial. The state had shown that Willie Crane not only had the knowledge, but the opportunity to dispose of his victim's body in the murky waters of Tampa Bay. To Prosecutor Chris Moody, Darlington's testimony helped overcome a major problem with the state's case: the fact that Amanda's body was never found.
Well, not having a body in a murder case is a big obstacle. It doesn't happen very often. One of the things that we are required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that Amanda Brown is dead.
The state would next have to explain to the jury why Amanda's body was never recovered.
Detective Hurley, can you tell us a little something about the search? Was it, in your opinion, a very exhaustive search, thorough?
Yes, sir. The search consisted of about...
It's a marine environment, and even as close to the city as it is, it's a fairly hostile marine environment. There's mangroves, which are very thick. Most of them are tidal in nature, so there's not a lot of true islands or places where you could stand up all day without the water coming up to your chin.
During the search, a police airboat capsized and sank in Tampa Bay. Prosecutor Jay Pruner used the incident to the state's advantage.
The waters of Tampa Bay were so unforgiving that you couldn't find a 2,000-pound steel airboat. It made sense then that an experienced crab fisherman would be able to dispose of a 7-year-old girl's body without leaving a trace of evidence.
The state then set out to prove that Amanda Brown had been in Willie Crane's home the night she disappeared. Prosecutor Chris Moody would rely on DNA evidence.
Finding Amanda's DNA pattern and then proving that it was on his underwear, Willie Crane's underwear, and his toilet seat was the linchpin in the case, because without that, we wouldn't have been able to prove that she was dead, nor would we have been able to prove that Willie Crane killed her.
The state called Dr. Martin Tracy, a population geneticist at Florida International University, to interpret the DNA evidence.
The DNA evidence taken from the Crane house shows quite clearly that there are DNA stains that match Amanda Brown, the victim. The odds of those stains coming from somebody else are 1 in the hundreds of millions. The more convincing is the mixture situations where you see a DNA stain, one taken from the toilet seat, okay, that shows a mixture of Crane and Amanda Brown. That suggests, at least in terms of the spatial relationship, that they were both there at the same time.
Dr. Tracy was the last witness to testify for the prosecution.
The prosecution rests, Your Honor.
The defense calls William Crane, Your Honor.
The defense's chances to obtain an acquittal for Willie Crane depended on testimony from Mr. Crane himself.
As manipulative as Crane was, I didn't think that his defense attorney could keep him off the stand. The Crane would insist on testifying.
What do you do for a living, sir?
Self-employed, commercial crabber.
Crane testified that he had never made it past grade school.
Ever since I was 9 years old, but...
He had been a fisherman his entire life.
How much of an education have you had?
Crane had an answer for all the suspicions raised by the prosecution.
Amanda, honey, you want to close my door and letting all my cold
For example,
air out?
he often kept his bedroom door closed to prevent the cold air from his air conditioner from escaping.
Did Amanda have a loose tooth that night?
Yes, sir. She kept fiddling with it, and finally it started to bleed.
Crane also had an explanation for the presence of Amanda's blood in his bathroom.
But one of the things DNA never tells you is how a particular stain got somewhere, in this case on the toilet seat or on his clothes. He tried to come up with the explanation that Amanda's tooth was loose and bleeding, and that's how the blood got on there.
Do you have any recollection on how you got those scratches on the back of your shoulders and arms?
Yes, sir. It's the bushes. People, when they rob your traps, they throw your traps in the bushes, the mangrove bushes. They're hard to get through. I go through them, I hold up my arms, try to keep branches from slapping me in the face. I just keep pulling myself through till I get my traps.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Crane, tell me how badly it hurt when Amanda gouged your elbow with her
Although I didn't
fingernails.
anticipate Crane would confess to me on cross-examination, I wanted to go for the jugular right away to keep him off balance, so that the jury could see Willie Crane for what he was, which is a manipulative predator, who, although of common background, was quick on his feet and quick to think and quick to react. And I think the jury got to see the real Willie Crane and his evasiveness and his manipulative responses.
Willie Crane's fate was in the hands of the jury, and prosecutors Jay Pruner and Chris Moody now had to wait.
When the jury goes out, I'm hoping for Roy Brown and Catherine Hartman and Amanda's sake that they come back with a conviction, so that if there can be any degree of closure in this case without the finding of Amanda Brown's body, that it will happen with a jury verdict of guilt.
They come back and you can hear a pin drop, whether it's a misdemeanors or first-degree murder. Whenever the judge says to the foreperson, will you please hand the verdict to the clerk and publish the verdict, the courtroom is deathly silent. And then she read the verdict.
Have you reached a verdict?
Yes, Your Honor. We, the jury, find the defendant, William Crane, guilty of murder in the first degree.
A month later, at the penalty phase of the trial, the prosecution brought in previous victims of the defendant. Their stories had an impact on the jury. In November 1999, Willie Crane was sentenced to death.
Molesters have a pattern where somebody identifies a particular age child to satisfy whatever perverse needs that they have, is something that studies show gets repeated if they aren't stopped. Parents need to be aware of that there are people with absolutely bad intentions, and they need to make sure that their children are protected as best as they can.